Teaching young learners. Classroom management. In the last input session, you learned about many factors which affect the way we plan and teach groups of young learners. And in this input, we're going to turn our attention to more practical concerns. Our objective is to create the optimal conditions for language learning and relate these back to the theory we saw before. Let's start by looking at three key areas: the learning environment itself, our learners' motivation, their attention spans, and how we keep and get that attention. Before we begin, spend a moment to brainstorm ideas for each of these topics. Look back at your notes and make some notes now of your ideas for the implications on the way you work with children in the classroom. What can we, as teachers, do to create the optimal conditions of learning? Pause the video now, and when you're ready, click to continue. Creating a positive learning environment. This is essential for children to feel relaxed and comfortable, so there are some basic ways that we can do this, and many of it relates to social behaviours. For example, when your learners arrive, give them a warm greeting so they feel welcome. Make sure you have a friendly smile and a friendly voice, and use the children's names so they feel comfortable and can respond to you. Ask them how they are, or say it's nice to see them. Make positive comments, so you can connect to something personal and make them feel good. You're trying to establish a bond. You could say something nice about their clothes, or a toy that they've brought from home. And if a child feels upset when they arrive, help them quickly. This way they can feel at home and they can forget why they were upset. Distraction often helps. Above all, we want to avoid the feeling spreading to other children in the room. Motivating your learners. Motivation is central to any form of learning. People don't learn effectively when they aren't motivated to do so. In the classroom, a lack of motivation often means a child becomes bored and uncooperative. The most important thing to remember is that success is motivating in itself. In the same way, failure, a poor result, or a negative experience is discouraging. So it's important to praise learners for what they can do, their efforts to do something, and any improvements they've made. When children feel successful, they will keep trying, so make sure you praise everyone. Young children like to talk about themselves, so make sure you connect what you're teaching them to their world and their interests. When practicing numbers, for example, help them count the chairs in the classroom, or the kittens on their shirt. When learning language for food, ask them what they like or don't like. Above all, elicit a personal reaction to language. You can make the learning meaningful if you give the learners a reason or a purpose. Children learn what they need to learn. If you teach them a new song, for example, you can motivate them by asking them to teach the song to their parents or friends. Another way to create a need to learn the language is to have your learners use it with each other in pairs or groups. We saw in our first week's presentation how to set these up. It gives them more time to communicate, and it allows them to mix with everyone in the group. Using pair and group work also changes the pace of the lesson. We've seen, and we'll see later, that children have a short attention span, so keep activities short and varied with regular changes of pace and focus. Working within attention spans. Why may learners lose concentration? Well, there are many reasons. The key one, though, is to understand that attention is a core factor in learning. We actively seek meaning in language when we pay attention, and we notice features. This is a fundamental process in language acquisition. It's obvious to say this, but young children have short but growing attention spans, and they're also easily distracted. There are many reasons why this can happen in the classroom, and here are some of the main ones. If your students don't understand the instructions, they'll lose interest and become restless. They're not sure of what is expected of them. The best way to make instructions clear is by using as few words as possible. Try to show learners what to do instead of explaining. And we're going to look more into how to set up tasks in a future presentation. Sometimes a child finds the activity boring, maybe because they've done it many times before. It could also be too easy or too difficult. And in these cases, learners will lose interest or give up. Learners need to feel a suitable level of challenge to stay motivated, but not over-challenged that they risk failure. Think about the time of day of your class. We all know how difficult it can be to focus if we're tired or hungry. Plan your lesson carefully in relation to the time of day and vary the pace and the variety of activities to allow for this. If the IWB or other equipment doesn't work, or the teacher takes too long handing out materials, children will lose interest and their minds will start to wander. So check everything and set up carefully before class. Have your worksheets prepared in neat piles so you're ready to hand them out. It may be that the children want to talk in Chinese about something else at one point or another in the class. If it's something important, you may have to deal with this. It may simply be a matter of getting their attention. Working effectively with children and creating good conditions for learning means working within their attention spans. It means regular changes of pace, focus, and activity. It means getting and keeping their attention to achieve your learning objectives. Getting and keeping attention. There are times in the lesson when you're more likely to lose children's attention. The challenge is to develop techniques to regain and maintain their concentration and focus. One obvious time when children are distracted is during transition times. For example, when you need to end one activity and move to the next. This can be challenging, especially if the children are excited. Here are some simple techniques that you could try. Remember that if you shout to get their attention, they will shout louder. So for very young learners, it could be simply putting your hand on your head and waiting. Other signals could be turning off the lights or playing some music. You can use an English song that the students like to signal the beginning of a particular section of your lesson. Another way is clapping a pattern that the students need to repeat and continue until you have everyone's attention. Or use a countdown, like give me 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And remember to praise the students, for example. When the child sits with their legs crossed, make a comment, "Well done, Ming, already sitting down." When the child has his hands folded in her lap or his lap, "Great, Lily, nice hands." Face the teacher. "Hi, Leo. Now I can see your nose." Eyes and ears open. "Good, Tina, looking at me." Mouths closed. Fantastic, everyone. Nice and quiet. These 5 areas focus on key learning behaviours that we want to encourage in the classroom. When children become familiar with just a few transitional techniques, they'll know what comes next, and they'll alter their behaviour accordingly. Discipline with younger learners. Discipline is about one thing only. It's about maintaining the best conditions for children to learn. Some behaviours are useful for this, but others are disruptive. So when we talk about discipline, what we're really talking about is implementing rules and procedures that enable all children to achieve their learning objectives and to learn in a fun and safe environment. There's a lot to say about discipline, but here are some key techniques that you can use to get started. Children like to have routines. The more children are familiar with class routines, the easier they are to manage, because they know what's expected of them. How should they enter the classroom? What's the first thing they should do as they come in? How do you start and finish the class? And how do you move from one activity to the next? What do children do when they've finished an activity? These are all questions you need to answer as you plan your lesson, and then to focus on in terms of your teaching practice during the lesson. Children need to understand the rules, and just as importantly, you need to be consistent in how you apply them. If you don't have a system for how you want your learners to behave, the rules will lose their meaning, and children will become confused. When you communicate with your students, crouch down to their level. This means that you can have eye contact when you want to make an important point. Children will also learn to read your facial expressions. They'll understand when you're being serious and when you're being more friendly and joking. It's more helpful to praise good behaviour than to tell students off for not using it. So focus on the positive. It will make learners want to be good. Remember, rewards can be verbal or material, such as reward cards or stickers. Correct learners' answers and use of good language. Correct answers and the use of good language should get rewards, but also positive behaviour such as listening to others and helping to clean up. Make sure you don't overpraise, because then it will become meaningless. The reward should come straight away and say what the learner has done well. Praise them in a loud, clear voice so other students can hear and want to copy the positive behaviour. Discipline with older learners. As children get older, teachers need to adapt their practice in order to maintain a positive and structured learning environment. Children are more self-aware and better able to manage their emotions and behaviour as they grow older, and they're also more likely to openly resist or challenge you. This is particularly true if they find learning English difficult, or they've developed negative attitudes towards the language and language classrooms generally. For learners that are a little bit older, you can decide on the rules together with them. You could make a classroom rules poster for the wall. If the student knows why the rule is in place, they are more likely to stick to it. Be strict and fair. Being strict is not about looking angry and harsh. It's about making sure the rules are maintained in a firm but fair and friendly way. You can still have fun and be a warm teacher and be strict with your class at the same time. In fact, the evidence is that children respond better to this kind of teacher. They know where they stand and they know where the boundaries lie. Use cards and behaviour charts. Red and green cards can send a very clear signal. You could put up posters on the wall with the students' names to keep record of their good work. Use stars or smiley faces or some other reward system. You can also put your learners in teams and award points. Learners don't usually want to let their friends down, so this type of peer pressure can be beneficial. Control or chaos. The 7 R's in classroom management. Leading ELT practitioner Carol Reed published an article in which she discusses 7 key areas which guide the way we manage learning and learners. Here they are, but I've removed the vowels. So pause for a moment and try to work them out. For example, number 1, R blank L blank S. That one stands for rules. Spend a moment and see if you can work out the others. When you're ready, click to continue. So here they are. These are the 7 R's that Carol Reed says underpin quality management in the classroom. Think about how you can integrate these areas into your teaching practice. Let's go through them very briefly. Rules. Yes, we need them. As we've said before, these set the boundaries of behaviour and establish a framework in which everyone knows what is expected and how to behave. Routines. Routines are patterns of behavior that are repeated in each lesson, and we've already seen that children need to know what happens when they walk into class, what happens when they first sit down. For example, do they take out their course book? Do they take out their stationery? 3. Relationships. Positive but professional relationships, both with the parents and with the child in the classroom, and also helping children to develop the relationships with their peers as well. Rights. Everyone has the right to learn in a safe and fun way. If a child is not allowing others to learn, then they need to be held back and rules need to be applied. This is what we refer to as discipline. And along with rights, we have responsibilities. Children love to take responsibility for things. So set up classroom monitors. Have children doing more. Give them a chance to be active and show just how much they want to participate in the life of the class. Respect. This is what underpins everything that we do. Respect for each other, respect for the premises, respect for our own materials, and rewards. We've just seen that. Rewards are a very useful way of demonstrating to children positive achievement, both in behaviour or use of language. Teacher talk. Children need access to language in order to learn it. The language they hear and use should be comprehensible, and children need to notice features of the language, the words, structures, and pronunciation, in order to learn and to begin to use it in meaningful communication. Our course materials provide us with a lot of language. Usually this is carefully graded and restricted. Very often it's in written form, with some listening material as well. But this alone isn't enough to stimulate acquisition. Just think about the first language environment. The child is within a very rich environment at home. Parents and other caregivers adjust their language naturally to support the child's language development. In the classroom, the teacher should provide similar spoken input to provide children with the rich, authentic language they need to communicate successfully. So pause for a moment. Think about how teachers use English talk in the classroom. For example, when giving praise and encouragement. When you're ready, click to continue, and we're going to explore several areas related to how we talk and why we do it. A model for communication. As a teacher, you have an important role in modelling natural and accurate language use. It is, of course, important that you adjust your talk well to the language level of the learners. Thinking back to our previous input, we know that children will acquire the language they hear around them, that they need to hear a lot of English, they need to listen to you and make sense of what you say, and they need to understand before they produce that language. Task instructions. This is an essential part of why we would talk to students in the classroom. It's very easy and quick to use Chinese when asking children to sit, stand, or move around in preparation for an activity. But your aim is to teach them English, not to be quick. So here are some tips to help you make your instructions in English effective. We're going to look in more detail in a later presentation. Keep your voice firm, but not too loud. This will encourage children to listen quietly and carefully. Speak naturally, but with fewer words. Break down your instructions into steps and demonstrate each step. Use 1 to 3 words per step, for example. Listen. Find the animal. Tap the animal. Use actions and gestures to show what you want them to do, as well as speech. Children will learn far more from this. Demonstrate the activity with your co-teacher or a teaching assistant, or even with a confident student. Then ask them to do it together. Check your instructions by asking students questions. For example, who's your partner? Do you walk or run? Do you listen or sing? Can you hit the board really hard? Give students a little bit of quiet time to think about what they're going to do before you ask them to start. This helps to focus them, but it also helps them prepare any language in their minds that they might need to use. We call this an activation step. So let's consider the use of English and Chinese in the classroom. It's important for children to be introduced to classroom language very early on, so that they can understand what you want them to do and get as much exposure as possible. Bilingual teachers need to make decisions about when to use English or Chinese in the classroom. The first language is a useful resource, but we need to ensure that English is the dominant language used throughout the lesson. So, use English as the main language for communication. Use gestures, actions, pictures, and whatever means you can to help children understand. Tell lots of stories using pictures for support and talking about those pictures, pointing things out. Talk to them about the things that are around them, the things in the room, what you can see from a classroom window, for example. Let children hear as much English as possible. And encourage your students by responding positively, even when what they say is not perfect. Sometimes there will be Chinese in the classroom. We need to make friends with the first language and see it as a springboard into English. So let's look at some possible parameters for the use of Chinese. Children need to talk in order to learn, so you may let them use Chinese to start with. You could also use Chinese to support them when they're doing a new activity, or if there's a moment when it's important that they understand something. But answer children in English as much as possible. If they say something to you in Chinese and you understand, repeat it back in English. You could use a puppet to talk in English. Tell the children the puppet can only speak English. If you have a teaching assistant, then you can agree a language policy between you. It could be that you never need to speak Chinese, and your assistant can help simply by giving background information to confirm what students should understand. So we've looked at the teacher's talk and why it's important to use English as much as possible, and we've looked at a few ways that we can create optimal conditions for learning. Another important area relates to what we call a multisensory approach. For some years, there was a belief that when it comes to learning, people have a predetermined preference for a particular sense or another. For example, some people are visual learners, they said. They learn by seeing. Some auditory, they learn by hearing. And some kinesthetic, they learn by doing. But this is in fact not the case. We learn through all our senses. We can be sure that children tend to learn experientially, through doing, but they also learn through the wide range of sensory input, touch, smell, sights, sounds that surround them. This means that in our classroom practice, we must aim to stimulate learners by activating as many senses as possible to make learning richer and more memorable. And we call this a multisensory approach. Visual learning. When we learn visually, we take in information from stories with pictures, for example. We take in information from the board or from flashcards. We're attracted, and children particularly, to colourful images, and videos will always get our attention. Computer graphics can be stimulating, as can maps, for example treasure maps, cartoons, posters. Board games are highly visual, as are worksheets and puzzles, So make sure you're using a good selection of visual learning material in the classroom. Auditory learning. You need to provide as many opportunities for children to learn through sound and noise. Songs are an obvious source, and you can encourage your learners to listen and sing along. And stories are very useful. It's something that children love. There are lots of readers available, but you can also make up your own stories to fit in with your lesson. You could also try adding pictures to add a visual element. Rhymes and chants are useful, and of course we've looked at teacher talk, which includes not only social talk, but spoken instructions and explanations. Your coursebook will of course have lots of listening material, and hopefully those will include different accents. Make sure you include plenty of oral activities, not only you interacting with the child, but children interacting in English together. This could be a role play or a little mini scene. And you could use background music and rhythms. Kinesthetic learning. Children always want to be on the go. They're full of life. They're active, and they don't enjoy just sitting and watching. It won't keep them interested, and ultimately it will lead to misbehavior. So you need to include plenty of activities that involve doing things. Action songs, for example. There are lots of these, whether they be nursery rhymes or ones from your own coursebook. Games and activities that involve the whole body are also useful. You can mime animals, mime movements. Exercise type activities are a lot of fun. For example, running and jumping. And of course, craft activities and models. Not only do these develop kinesthetic learning ability, but they also help with creativity, thinking, planning, and provide a quiet time very often. So include those activities with Play-Doh or Lego. Summing up. In this input, you've looked in more detail at a range of aspects of classroom management. We set out to explore ways of aligning our classroom practice to some of the key background theories so that we can create optimal conditions for learning. In this presentation, we've looked at creating a positive learning environment and motivating our learners. Understanding that children have short attention spans and that they're easily distracted. And the teacher needs to provide the structure, rules and procedure to maintain order and discipline so that all children can learn in a safe and fun way. We've seen that the teacher's talk is a rich source of authentic input, and we need to think about when and how we use English as the main classroom language. Learning is more memorable when all our senses are activated, and young children learn through all their senses, but they are active and they learn primarily through doing. The implication here is that your classes should contain plenty of opportunities to learn visually, through hearing, and of course through doing. You've covered a lot of issues in these two input sessions. You focused on methodology, based on research into first and second language acquisition, and you considered a wide range of suggestions on how to put that theory into practice when you plan and deliver lessons. In the next activity, you'll meet with your group to share your ideas and find out what other teachers think, and also to discuss what you've learned. So prepare now for your group discussion. First, make a note of any questions, doubts or insights you want to share with your group. And also think about what you want to ask your tutor and discuss further in your online tutorial. As always, if you have a chance, try to implement some of the ideas you've learned in your classes. What was the effect on interaction? How effective was your management? And what do you feel you need to work on more in your teaching practice? Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.